Welcome everyone to the webinar Strategy Execution. Failure should not be an option. This is a webinar for executives and managers. Thank you for joining me. I'm just delighted that you're able to be here with me today. My name is Dwight Mahalitz. I'm the president of Effective Managers. Have been doing this work for a number of years now, and I particularly focus in with CEOs and heads of HR to help them improve organization performance. And by doing that, we really focus in on helping managers to be as effective as possible. This has implications for organizational performance, but it also has implications for basically, teams and team performance and how managers are able to get about doing their managerial work. So you'll find out more about that as we go through the webinar today. We're also very fortunate today that we have with us one of the founders of one of our partner firms, who is Randy Baldwin. He's going to say a few words about a project that we're working on right now. We just had a client meeting a couple of days ago in Calgary in Canada, and thanks for joining us, Randy, and looking forward to the words that you will have for us towards the end of this. So in terms of the webinar today, if we're thinking about managers, I think about managers as the unsung heroes in organizations. They're typically under-resourced, they're typically over-delegated, they typically don't have priorities clear from their own management and from the organization about where they should be focusing their efforts. And yet, at the end of the day, they manage to get things done. And they get things done in organizations that tend to look like this from the perspective of the manager. They're pulled in many, many different directions. There's all different kinds of things that are important in the day-to-day operations of the organization. So as they're doing their work, it tends to feel more like this. Of course, they're an important piece of pulling the puzzle together, but that puzzle can feel to be pretty burdensome as one tries to do the work, often in situations where managers are putting barriers in place. So our objective as effective managers as a firm, and I believe which would be consistent with most organizations, is how do we build that team? How does everybody know how their piece of the puzzle fits in with all of the other pieces of the puzzle? And in keeping with that, today I'd like to give you one of those pieces of the puzzle, and it's all around strategy and strategy execution. So if we think about organizations and the purposes of organizations and what they're trying to achieve, organizations are all about using resources in order to create value. And the creation of value is done primarily through the people in the organization, and managers are accountable for those people. So it all ties together, and I will walk you through that today. So to start off, I'd like to start talking a little bit about strategy. Because I find in my experience that most organizations are pretty good at developing strategies. They have this vision for the future. Here I've picked the Pegasus as the strategic vision for our future, and they do a lot of work in the organization figuring out amongst themselves how it is that they're going to achieve that vision. And yet 3, 4, 5 years in the future, when it comes time to measure the success in implementing that vision, we've often end up in this kind of a situation, is we're at a completely different place from where we envisioned. And this isn't because people don't care. It's not because people aren't doing their best. It's not because the strategy isn't important or wasn't good. It's because things are getting in the way of people being able to implement their pieces of the puzzle so that the strategy can be implemented effectively overall. And that's not unusual. If you feel that in your organization that you're just not able to get strategy and projects implemented on time, it's quite consistent. And in fact, I came across this article in an issue of Forbes not that long ago from John Kotter. He's a transformation person, an expert in change management in organizations. And it reaffirms, but he put it very succinctly, but it reaffirms research that I've seen over the last decade or two that 70% of organizations consistently fail to achieve their strategic goals. And Kotter refines that a little bit more. He says that only 5% of them actually implement them successfully, and the other 25% are somewhere in the middle. And I've coined a term to discuss this. I call this term organizational churn. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute because it's really important. So if we're thinking then about why organizations are not able to implement their strategies, there's a number of factors at play. One is that organizations currently are very highly interdependent. So just think about yourself in your role and think about how dependent you are on others for success. So if you're going to be successful in your work, you depend on the outputs from other people in other parts of the organization. And many others in other parts of the organization depend on you. So this is research here that we did with the University of Ottawa that shows how highly interdependent positions tend to be on each other. And yet, when we look in organizations, these are also some factoids, if you will, from the research that we did in 2013, 36% of managers don't feel that work flows smoothly across their organization. And almost 50% of managers are experiencing conflict with accountabilities in different areas of their work. So in terms of trying to do their work, they're number one, feeling that it's not working well in terms of work that's happening in other parts of the organization, and number two, that it can actually be in conflict situations. This is another research study that was published last year in Harvard Business Review by Sull, Holmes, and Sull. And I found this absolutely startling. I had this sense, but I hadn't seen the research in this way. Only 9% of managers say they can rely on colleagues to do what they say they'll do all of the time. So if you're in an organization that's highly interdependent and you can only depend on your colleagues 9% of the time to do what you need to be successful, imagine the situation that sets up an organization. And organizations aren't very good about resolving those kinds of issues. This same study by Sull, Holmes, and Sull shows that conflicts tend not to be handled well. So 38% of the time, about a third of the time, that's 1 in 3, they may be resolved, but it's after a significant delay. So it's not timely in the way that would matter to managers to be successful in their work. Or it's resolved, but it's resolved poorly, or it's just left to fester. This is what I call the work it out yourself syndrome. So all of this together then does result in this term that I've coined called organizational churn. Churn is used in organizations to describe turnover, and that's part of it because people who are in situations in their organization where they can't be successful will move to an organization where they can feel that they're using their full capability and can be successful. But it's also other stuff that happens in organizations. It's this activity without results. It's going to meetings, meetings. We're always going to meetings, but why doesn't somebody just decide what we need to do? It's entering into conflict with people in other parts of the organization. I call it getting things done by negotiation. You have to continually negotiate the services or the cooperation that you need from others in other parts of the organization, when in fact it should be a way of doing business. Poor communication, silos, organizational drift is a symptom where the organization just isn't able to get things in place. So it's not like organizations and CEOs and executives and even yourselves, we have many executives and managers in the room today, but if we think about what we do, we recognize these things, and organizations do try to tackle issues. So they run programs for better meetings, or they do team building exercise, they do leadership training. But in my experience now in going into organizations, I'm getting increasing skepticism about training. And here I'm not talking about frontline kind of training in terms of how to do, how to repair this engine better, faster, or how to keep this line moving more efficiently. I'm talking about that kind of management and leadership training that's being, organizations spend a lot on, and people spend a lot of time doing this training, does not seem to be delivering the kinds of results that would be expected. And I had the penny dropped for me a couple of years ago when I saw this study. It was published by Gallup. It's the state of the American workplace. And what fascinated me about this is, well, number one is the basic premise is scary if you think about it. So here they show engaged employees versus not engaged employees versus actively disengaged employees. So 30% of the workforce, less than 1 in 3 is engaged. These are the people that are willing to go the extra mile. They kind of take the initiative and they do what needs to be done in the organizations. They're the ones that tend to be in all of your change teams and your project teams. Then you have in the middle the not engaged ones. So they're the plodders. They come in, they do what needs to be done, they follow instructions. They want to do good work, but they're not quite the go-getters of the engaged. And then you actually have this group at the bottom, the 1 or 2 in 10, who are actually actively disengaged. And in some situations, these may be individuals that are actively working against the best interests of the organization. So that's a scary group there. But if you think about this, and if you look at it, the second thought that I have is that if we've been measuring this for a decade and a half now, since the year 2000. And if I were to draw the trend lines, and I don't have access to the data, so this is just me freehanding the trend line, but I think using your own judgment, you can see that things haven't changed that much since the year 2000. So the question is this: if we're measuring important things, and I think we are, because we know that organizations with higher engagement are more successful. So if we're measuring important things, why don't the trend lines look more like this? You know, if we're measuring important things that are working contrary to us being as effective as we can in organizations, and we're taking initiatives that are tackling those problems, shouldn't we have, in general, more engaged employees, not the same amount? So I think there's something more fundamental that's happening, and it's leading directly to this whole concept of organizational churn. The first one, I'm going to give you 2 examples, and I take these 2 examples from employee engagement surveys, because everyone I've seen, these come out either number 1 and 2 or number 2 and 1, and the first one tends to be communication. And if you think about communication, communication is having the information that you need to do to make decisions that you need to decide in your work. We're talking in a work sense here, not in the personal sense. And yet in organizations, so often I hear managers talking about a situation where they've been working away on this project and find out after having invested a lot of time and energy into it, that there was either a significant change in the project, there was a change in the deadline, or sometimes the project had been canceled or postponed indefinitely. So here's a manager plowing away, doing work that's just not going to be helpful to the organization. So a waste of time, in other words. And so often there's wasted effort because the messaging isn't there that's required. So the language of people is, you know, I wasted time working on this area when I didn't have to. Boy, do we have poor communication in this organization. When in fact what's happened is that there's been a failure in the management system somehow for that decision to be communicated to the individual. So when organizations see something like this, a communication issue on an employee engagement survey, they immediately tackle communication. So we're going to do training on how to communicate better. We're going to create an internal communications team. We're going to have more emails and do a newsletter and so on. So those things all tackle communication, but they're not addressing the fundamental issue that managers are accountable for getting information from higher in the organization and translating it into useful bits for their subordinates and their teams, for them to be able to do the best work possible. The second highest rating one that I see in employee engagement surveys is around collaboration. So we have poor collaboration in this. The best example I know of this one is I was hearing the sad news story from a manager I was talking to, who gave me the example that she had promised a report to her manager. It was due the next day. Finance had to develop a report for her in order for her to include that and make her conclusions. And finance had promised to have the information to her the day before, and yet didn't come through. So when she phoned, finance said, "I'm sorry, you know, I know I promised it for today, but just wasn't able to get to it. So I will be able to get to it next week." So now here you have a situation of a manager not being able to do something they promised for their boss because somebody in another part of the organization let them down. So what's the message? What's the feedback that they would give on an employee engagement survey? It's, boy, do we have poor collaboration here. But again, what's failed is not necessarily the collaboration. We're not staffed with people that want to sabotage others in other parts of the organization. What we don't have is a means of ensuring that people have a common understanding of how they work together in organizations. So the word collaboration is used to discuss this, but training in team building isn't going to deal with that. Rather, how do we put in place accountability, authority frameworks so that people understand how to work with each other going across the organization? So if you think about managers, then what is the solution? The solution is to get more to the root cause, because what we're measuring in employee engagement surveys are symptoms of problems in organization. And if we treat the symptoms, it's like giving an aspirin to treat a fever. The fever is going to go away for a while, but the basic fundamental disease isn't gone, and therefore the fever will come back. So it's the same thing in organizations. We do the training on the communications, we do the training on leadership, we do the training on collaboration and team building, and it helps for a while, and they're not bad things to do, but unless they're grounded in this system of how we work together in the organization, they're not going to provide the kinds of results that we need for organizations to be successful in the work that they need to do. Just before I leave this slide, I don't want to leave the wrong impression with any of you that that I'm against employee engagement surveys, because I think they do measure good things, and I think it is important for organizations to be in touch with their employees on these kinds of factors. But what I'm saying is, let's use the information to help us understand what is happening in the organization and how we can improve that. So up until now, most of the work that I have seen is at the symptomatic level, and I'll come back to you about on this, about how we can get to root cause. So I made reference to my experience with managers earlier in the first part of this slide. So in order to understand this, what we did in 2013 is partner with the University of Ottawa to try to understand this, because in my experience as a manager, as an executive, as the head of organization, and then now for the last gosh, it's going on over 15 years as a management consultant, is that no matter how much we've been trying to improve systems and processes in organizations, managers still seem to be grist for the mill. They're caught in the middle, and they're just not able to focus in on those things that are important. And I really wanted to understand what was happening there. So one of the key findings that we had is this one. And I had read, and I spent about a year before we started the research just reading into this area and trying to understand what was happening. And I'd heard reference to how much time managers can actually spend on the work that they were hired to do, but there was no research that actually documented that. So this is the first research that's soon to be published. Swigo, my partner, and I are both working on separate papers which will soon be published, that managers only spend 55% of their time doing value-added work. So that's work that only they, with their capability, at their level in the organization, are able to do. So how sad is that managers spend almost half of their time doing stuff that they realize in their heart just isn't at the core of what they need to be doing? So what do managers need to be doing? And this leads directly to the rest of the information that I'm going to give to you today. So if we think about value-added work, it fits into three buckets. So value-added work is this work that only I can do. It's that work that is going to kind of justify the salary that the organization is paying my position to accomplish. So the first one is I call this the day job. It's that stuff that's documented in position descriptions. So what is the day-to-day work and the continuous improvement of that work? So this is work that when I come in the morning, I know I've got to get this work done, and it's going to take my focus to do it. The second bucket of work in value-added work is projects or change initiatives. So these are things, they're not covered off in the job description, but they're directly related to my role, and for whatever reason I've been put in charge or delegated some particular change activity. These tend to be documented fairly well, and they tend to have time horizons, and because they are different and special, they tend to get the attention that they need. The third bucket is a bit different, and I call this one managerial leadership. When you talk about value-added work, and when I read about it, this usually isn't on the list, and that's not very good, because if you think about value-added work, you as the manager in your role are the only person that is in the right place at the right time with the right capability to manage your team. So if you're not managing your team, no one else is managing your team for you. So managerial leadership becomes a critical aspect of value-added work. And then here's the kicker in all of this. If you think about those three buckets of value-added work, if you're only able to spend 55% of your time on value-added work, so you've only got half of your time basically left, which one of these three tends to get delayed? You're not going to put off your day-to-day work. You're certainly not going to not perform in terms of special projects that have been delegated to you. What happens is it's the managerial leadership work that tends to be put on the back burner. I'll cancel my team meeting this month because we can handle it next month. I'll do the performance management meetings. I know I'm supposed to do them, but I can do them next week and this week. Or I have to cancel this one-on-one because we've had this crisis over on the other side of the organization. So it's that urgent versus the important. So while managerial leadership work is very, very important, it often doesn't get the attention that it needs. And that leads to a lot of situations in organizations that are profoundly problematic for organizations to be successful and for organizations to be able to execute their strategies in the way that they should. This isn't all going to be about research, but there's two more studies that I want to refer you to because they're helpful. Well, actually three. There's two slides. So the first one here is this Lee Branham. He's written the book, The 7 Hidden Reasons Employees Leave, and he's found through some very nice research, I really like this book and recommend it to you, that 70% of employees leave a job for reasons related to factors that are directly controllable by their managers. So because managers aren't focusing in on doing their managerial leadership work, it can have an impact in terms of employees staying or not. So losing team members is one of the kinds of churn I talked about and a very real risk. The other one is from Gallup, and they show this, which you see on the screen, that teams that are not managed well are not as productive and are less profitable. This study that I'm referring to now was published by James Heskett in Harvard Business Review in 1994. And sort of the initial reaction is, oh, we heard, 94 is a long time ago. But this was a groundbreaker then. He's a professor at Harvard and did this research. And he described this relationship between employees, customers, and organization performance in that more satisfied employees result in more satisfied customers, result in an improved life cycle for the client, and therefore the lifetime value of the client is increased, and therefore revenues and profits are both higher. This was groundbreaking at the time, but it's been replicated in many different ways over the years since then. And when you ever hear anyone talking about the service profit chain, they tend to be talking about employees, customers, and profit. What's lost is this fourth part of the service profit chain, which was very, very explicit in Heskett's 1994 research, is that that employee satisfaction is grounded in managerial leadership practices. So it's the leadership practices of the organization that determine how well or not, employees will be satisfied. The satisfied word is used from 94. We talk about engagement now, which I think is a more robust definition of what we're talking about, but nonetheless the principle is exactly the same. It's what we do as managers with respect to our subordinates and our teams that is going to drive whether or not employees are engaged in the work that they need to do. Buying a new electronic game for the lunchroom, or offering free coffee, or sending people away on a weekend away or a retreat. These are good things to do, but they in themselves are not going to drive employee satisfaction. It almost comes again down to, in fact, it does come again down to the point of treating at the symptomatic level that if we do more things for our employees, if we give them a bonus for this, or we do whatever, that they're going to be more engaged, when that in fact is not going to happen. You might get their attention, you might get an uptick in employee satisfaction or employee engagement surveys, but unless the managerial leadership work is done, you're not going to get the kind of results that you're going to want in organizations. So from our research then, what is the fundamental factor in managerial leadership that makes the difference? It's this one. In our research with the University of Ottawa, we found that organizations that have a higher degree of accountability are more effective. There's just no question about it. In fact, the correlation is 0.67. A correlation, for those of you that aren't in stats, a correlation of 1 is a perfect correlation. It's like a car driving down the road. The left front wheel is perfectly correlated with the right front wheel because they're both turning at exactly the same rate of speed. So that's a correlation of 1. A correlation of 0 would be 2 random events, 2 completely unrelated random events, so there's no correlation. So 0.67 for social sciences research is very, very high. And in fact, when I presented this together with Professor Go at a conference in Paris in June, the recipients were, the people in the room were quite astounded at how highly correlated that was. So accountability then becomes really, really fundamental in organizations. But is there a definition even for accountability? I was totally surprised when I was doing the reading for this to find that there is no standard definition for accountability in organizations. There's only a handful of people actually doing research in this area, and each of them has their own definition. So working with Professor Go, we came up with this definition that accountability, and this again is in the organizational sense, accountability is an obligation for which one can be held to account for one's results and one's actions by a specified other. So there's 3 parts to this, and which I'd like you to keep in mind. So the first one is that it's an obligation, so you feel obligated to do something. The second is that you're held to account for your results and your actions, so getting things accomplished at any cost is not appropriate. And the third is this concept of a specified other. So one cannot hold one's self accountable. One can be held accountable because they can be called to account by some other individual. So this is describing the manager-subordinate relationship in an organization, because the manager can hold the subordinate accountable for doing things. The manager delegates work and ensures that people do that work and holds them accountable for the results. I know some of you have this question about, well, what's responsibility in all of this? So you know, if my manager doesn't hold me accountable, am I responsible for something? So the answer to that one is absolutely yes, in fact, but it's really important that we differentiate in our minds responsibility from accountability. Responsibility is driven by self-held values. Accountability is this concept of someone else being able to call me to account for my actions. So let's keep those 2 differentiated. So accountability is a very precise term which we have to use appropriately in organizations. So we've found then that in organizations, managers can only spend 55% of their time on value-added work. We've found that accountability drives effectiveness in organizations. So why is it that accountability, why is it then that managers aren't more effective? Why is that 55% number there instead of 80% or 90%? This was the second major finding for me coming out of the research that we did, is that accountability actually has two dimensions. Because in my work experience, in my life experience, people in organizations tend to want to do well. If you're hired into a job, you want to do well in the job, and you want to do well for your team, and you want the organization to be successful. So it's this teasing apart these two different parts of accountability that becomes really important for us as managers as we do our work. So the first one is felt accountability. So how strongly do I feel accountable for stuff, for doing good things in the organization? And our benchmark shows that managers do feel accountable. So it's a mean of 8.7 out of 10 on a Likert scale. So that, if that were a term paper, that would be an A+. But the second dimension is clarity of accountability. So how clearly do I understand that which I am accountable for? And here we get a score that's much lower, almost full 2 percentiles, 2 deciles different. So it's a B- in terms of scoring, 7.1 out of 10. So there's a very significant difference here. So while people feel accountable for doing good work, they're not really clear about what they should be accountable for. And this helps to then understand this relationship of managerial leadership in this, because who in the organization can help me be clear about what I'm accountable for? That's the fundamental work of the manager in the organization. So whether or not clear accountabilities are set in organizations, this is a key takeaway for you. Whether or not clear accountabilities are set within organizations, managers are going to take on accountability, or they're going to feel accountable for doing things. So the question before us in managers and as organizations is not whether people will feel accountable or not, it's whether they will feel accountable or not for the right things. So part of us then in our work in organizations as executives and as managers is to ensure that we have systems in place so that people can be clear about their work. And this gives us a two-headed bonus. If people are clear about what they're accountable for in their work, this can lead to clarity of action, so that for which I am accountable and must do. But it also helps out with this second aspect I talked about around collaboration. It helps with the clarity of interaction, because if we have a framework in the organization that is clear in terms of delegating accountability, I will be clear about my work, but I also will be clear about my work with respect to the work of others, so that instead of having to continually negotiate or plea and bargain for work to be done on our behalf, we understand how we work together in terms of helping the organization to be successful. As you can tell, I'm really excited by the results of this work. In fact, I had semi-retired from consulting to do this research and was planning on being more involved in research as my last career. But I was so moved by these results and so excited by the potential for organizations that I created the company Effective Managers to provide a framework to help managers create organizations where their teams can be more successful, and to work directly with CEOs to ensure that their organizations can be high performing and that all of the employees and managers in their organization can be more successful. So I'm not going to say any more about research, but I did upload onto GoToWebinar, so you will see a section where you can download materials, and there is a white paper there which you can click on, and that will download a PDF for you. It's also available on my website, although I think I might be charging a small fee for it on the website, so grab it here. It's your bonus for signing up and participating. And if you have any questions about any of that additional material, do please get back to me. So I'd like to change gears then. So I think I've made the case for you that managers can be more effective than they are, and that accountability is one of the key drivers in terms of success in that work. So to change things in your organization, what has to happen? So the first step is that you have to understand the current state. And this is really important because in any system, And an organization is a system. I didn't start with that figure today, lucky you. So an organization is a system. So if we want to improve the system, we have to understand the current state of the system so that as we change pieces, we can understand what the results are. Otherwise, it's just kind of randomly, let's try this, let's try that, let's try that. It just occurred to me, but that's not unlike the way we treat training now. You know, this seems to be a problem. Let's try that training. Oops, that didn't work. Let's try that training. So let's think about what is the system. What are our strengths within the organization? What are our opportunities? And therefore, what are those 1 or 2 or 3 things that we should tackle in order to be able to improve the situation in our organization? So this is a project that we're just now winding up with a client in Western Canada, and I'm soon going to ask Randy to say a few words about that as a member of a partner firm that we're collaborating with on this. So in terms of the support to organizations, then what we're doing is we're really providing a methodology whereby organizations can understand what is happening within their organization. So we've used the survey that we used in the research program with the University of Ottawa and developed it for use within organizations. Randy, I'm going to take the mute off of your microphone, and this would be a great time if you have a couple of words for us in terms of our recent experience together with the client that has just finished this phase.
Hello, can you hear me, Dwight?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, good. Just a little bit of background. I've known Dwight since about 2011 when we both volunteered to help the International Council of Management Consultants to determine how they could finance a significant expansion of the offerings to member organizations around the world. Dwight has since moved on to be treasurer of the international organization, and I've become a director representing Canada on that international organization. Through working with Dwight at regular meetings and one-on-one, I learned that his work with Dr. Go at the Telfer School of Business, University of Ottawa. After attending several of Dwight's webinars, as we've all been doing today, I became convinced that he has a wealth of valuable knowledge about organizational development, which he uses to improve business performance for clients. In the last 6 months, myself and another Manitoba-based management consultant, Tim Kist, have been working closely with Dwight to develop the Effective Manager program in the Manitoba market. The current project has been a great learning experience, all the way from holding the executive briefing that we held in Winnipeg for a group of CEOs, through the initial discussions with one of those CEOs about his company's particular situations and challenges, through the proposal development, where we worked very closely with Dwight and then further refined the proposal. Then we were involved in the interviews of the company's directors, the conducting of the survey and the report preparation, and lastly, just this week, involved in the client presentation to the CEO and his direct reports. It's been a very positive experience. Dwight has been great to work with, and we're learning a lot about how to expand our business opportunities using effective managers. I would encourage anyone who is serious about helping clients to improve their execution of business strategies to consider joining the effective management delivery team. With that, back to you, Dwight.
Thank you very much, Randy. Much appreciated, and thank you for those kind words. Okay, I'll just, before I forget, Randy, I'll put you back on mute so we don't, so you can get back to your cup of coffee if you have one in front of you. Thank you again. I really appreciate your sitting in on the meeting. Okay, the slide in front of you now shows the just a little bit of the report overview. So Randy's done a really nice job of covering that off, so I don't need to belabor this. As you referred to it, and I think this is a really important part of any consulting project, and whether you're working with me or Randy or a partner firm or any consulting firm, is that in the resulting product, be sure there's this robust interaction between you and the product. One of the greatest frustrations that I have had in my career as a management consultant is to do good work and then find the report on the shelf, and it's been really important for me in the creation of this firm to ensure that we're taking the complex aspects of systems but creating them in creating simple, understandable ways of using them within organizations that can have the comprehensive results. So, you know, it was Einstein said, make everything as simple as possible, but no simpler. There is a risk in many of the management leadership books that you buy in at Chapters, purport to have a very simple solution to a very complex problem, and it never works. But if we can get things to a situation where clients and organizations, people like yourselves, can say, yeah, why didn't I think of that? That's going to be great. And with some interventions from us and some coaching and some facilitation of meetings and perhaps some training, we can get you started on the right path in a way that would be faster and easier and more effective for you. Then that's the heart of management consulting. So in this assessment survey, we do in fact build in a 3-hour meeting, because it's really, really important that the executive team and the CEO understand the report, but also there's some facilitation in terms of what we can do about it. And that's the wrap-up part of the webinar for us today. We have about 20 minutes ahead of us, and I think we're in good phase for that, because what I'd like to do now is switch gears and talk about the next step. So you understand your current situation. What are the things that you can do about it? So the first step, and I've alluded to this a couple of times, but it has to do with a phrase. I wish I could find a more simple phrase, but I call it the accountability and authority framework. So it's that framework. I call it a framework because it applies to the whole organization. If you're thinking about a house, the framing of the house is what creates the ability for the house to stand and to accept everything else, the exterior cladding, the insulation, the power, the plumbing. If you don't have the framework, it's not going to move. So in the same way you need the framing for a house or a structure, organizations need this framing of accountability and authority so that people can be aware in real terms and clear in real terms of that for which they are accountable and how they will do their work. Because if you don't have that, what happens in organizations is that at the top of the organization, the CEO and the executive team have this great vision for the organization, which we've talked about already, and the strategy gets approved, and they have a bit of a celebration, and then the CEO says to the VPs, okay, get on with it, and then moves on to the next challenge. And so what happens, and this is again through no ill will, but what happens is throughout the organization, as each VP puts their spin on the strategy, because they have filters. They've got the CFO has a finance filter, the COO has an operations filter, the head of HR has that human resources filter, and as they implement it with their teams, and then the directors with their teams, you get this kind of children's whispering game impact hitting the organization, so that the drift sets in. So what we need to have then in organizations is a means of ensuring that from the CEO to the VPs and on down, that there is a consistent way of delegating and conveying decisions that have been made in the organization, and a strategic plan is a type of decision. So the CEO, in terms of looking at their role, determines what is it that I'm accountable for. Implementing the strategy, fairly easy. But then, second question, what is it that I must personally deliver for success? So what is that work which I must do, my value-added work? And then having that same discussion with each one of the VPs. What is that value-added work that they must now do in their role to ensure that once they've done that in collaboration with all of the other VPs, they are doing the work that needs to be done so that I, as the CEO, can do my work so that we can meet the strategy. And those are partly group decisions and they're partly one-on-one decisions that are as precise as what's different Monday, what's different next week, what's different 5 years from now. So having really absolute clarity in terms of what the VP is accountable for, and including in that the accountability for doing that same work at the next level down the organization. So in order to help organizations with this work, we've developed a methodology which we call the effective point of accountability. And the effective point of accountability has been developed with live organizations. So it's not something that I sat in my home office and wrote. It's based on excellent work of predecessors, so I'm not going to say I dreamed it up. It's Elliot Jackson, Jerry Cranes are inspirations to me, and I've got I refer to their work later on in the presentation. But what we've done here is come up with a methodology that can be implemented in organizations in a way that can be meaningful. So this becomes the diagram, if you will, about how one determines their value-added work. So each of you in your own roles thinking about those things which you must focus on in order to ensure that your department is successful as possible, while within the context of your manager's plan, so that all of you are tied together in terms of achieving the strategy for the overall organization. And then delegating that down to the next level of the organization and so on. There are two keys here. One is that in terms of thinking about the effective point of accountability, we do need to identify those single points of accountability. And I'm going to start calling it the EPA now for convenience. So the effective point of accountability, the EPA for any particular accountability requires to find the individual who will be the single point of accountability, who will be as low as possible in the organization for the work to be done successfully. And that's really important, because if you think about it, if something's delegated to you and you just decide to do it, but you could have delegated, or you could have chunked it up into smaller pieces and set it down to others, but you just decide to do it, then this is costing the organization more than it needs to pay, because your salary level and your compensation is higher than it would be lower in the organization. So it's you undoubtedly will be successful, but at a greater cost. If you push it too far down the organization without chunking it up, then the risk is that it'll get to a level in the organization where the person doesn't have the capability, either the information or problem-solving capability to be able to do the work well, or the skills and knowledge. If that happens, then you risk failure. So you don't want either one of those two solutions. What you need to do, and part of this chain, is ensuring where is the value-added work, which means ensuring that the people have the capability to do that. So that one's relatively straightforward, and I have a white paper on this one too that you can download. When it comes to cross-functional work, though, it gets a heck of a lot more complicated very much more quickly. So I've drawn this diagram here for you just to show you a model organization. So if we think about a process, look in Team Green here, this process runs only within Team Green. The EPA for this work, in terms of work that's going across more than one individual, is the manager of Team Green. That's pretty straightforward, because this manager, if there's a problem with the process, you can detect the problem, you can analyze the problem, you diagnose the solution, and you implement the solution, and you tell people how to work differently. And all of that is within your authority. So that's a straightforward, effective point of accountability. But the minute that process goes across more than one group, here we have Team Gold and Team Green are both working on this same process. If there's a problem in the process, and particularly these problems are at the handoff point. So if the last person touching it on Team Green has a disagreement with the first person touching it on Team Gold, how do you resolve that? Well, Team Green, the manager of Team Green, can do his or her best to try to resolve it, and the manager of Team Gold can do his or her best to try to resolve it. But if they can't independently, the first thing they have to do is try to resolve it mutually, so they have a discussion about that. But if they disagree, where is the person that has the authority to decide what was going to happen differently and direct people how to work differently? It has to move up one more level. So it's the EPA actually ends up being then in the third level of this organization to be able to make a decision. No, I'm not saying that manager has to be involved in everything, because most of the stuff is going to work smoothly. Sometimes if the team member in green and the team member in gold, usually in fact if they disagree, they will be able to resolve it. If they can't, then usually their managers can resolve it. But at the end of the day, if they can't, then the issue is significant enough that it needs the attention of the EPA. And then we look at the process that goes across the whole organization, and in this situation the CEO is the EPA, because this is the only individual who can resolve disagreements or conflicts or resolve issues that cannot be resolved lower. And again, I'm not saying, and I want to make this really clear, I'm not saying that every process dispute needs to go to the CEO's desk. I couldn't be further from the truth. The project manager role is a really, really important role, and the project manager can do the training and do the support, do the coordination, do all of those things. But at the end of the day, if there's something so fundamentally wrong with the process that the individuals at the front line couldn't resolve it, the frontline managers couldn't resolve it, the directors couldn't resolve it, the VPs couldn't resolve it, then there is something so wrong with that process that it needs to be fundamentally looked at. So something happened in the context from the CEO level when the process was developed that it's flawed, and it therefore needs the attention of the CEO to resolve. Similarly, if you have any two individuals in different parts of the organization where there's continual conflict and it's not resolvable lower, it tends to be a result of poor context in terms of the design of the overall system, and the effective point of accountability for that, again, does come up right to the CEO. So the takeaway then from the effective point of accountability for cross-functional work is that the EPA rests with the position that can decide and direct. So it becomes an easy kind of thumbnail decision point about how do you resolve cross-functional work. Let me just say one more word on that, because I don't want this to feel overwhelming for you. If you think about a disagreement, and this happens typically when I'm working with an organization to implement the effective point of accountability, I tend to work with the CEO and the executive team, and as part of the process I'll interview each member of the executive team to understand their work, but also hotspots in the organization. What are those issues that continually are irritants that haven't been resolved? And often I will find ongoing dispute is probably too wrong a word, but disagreements or differing opinions about how work should be done. Finance is usually one of the parties, because poor finance is involved in almost everything, and operations may be the other party. But if you think about it, at the end of the day, if I'm the CFO and I feel strongly about what's best for the organization from the perspective of finance, and this is a different take on it than the COO, who feels strongly about something in terms of what's the best way of doing something for the success of the organization from the operations perspective. And if they feel really strongly about it, the COO was hired because, you know, they're going to be great at operations, and the CFO was hired because he or she is going to be great at finance. And they have valid perspectives, which could quite validly be different. So if they can't agree between themselves, what's the one position that can decide what is best for the organization overall, taking into account what's best for finance and what's best for operations? It is the chief executive officer. So it is real work that needs to be done in terms of thinking about what are the trade-offs between how we do our work together so that the organization overall can be the most successful. So having those honest, open, transparent discussions about what's best from different perspectives, but recognizing that at the end of the day, the CEO needs to drive the organization in terms of achieving the percentage. So if the philosophy or the culture, as I so often find it is in the organization, is let them work it out, it will come at a huge cost to the organization because they will do their best to work it out. They feel accountable for working it out, so they're going to do their best to work it out, and they will negotiate some kind of a compromise, and that compromise probably isn't going to be what would have been best for the organization had the CEO rolled up his or her sleeves, dug in, and made the decision. So don't want to get preachy about that, but it's a really important point because if we can encourage those kinds of discussions and make sure that that disputes in organizations are treated as organizational issues that the organization needs to set context for and are not failings of individuals because they can't find the solution, then we would all be much, much further ahead in organizations. So here's the overview of the effective point of accountability where I outline that philosophy. It's in the white paper and you can download it by clicking on that link. If any of you have any trouble, by the way, I've not done this as a participant, so if any of you have any problems in terms of the handouts, let me know and I'll email you a copy. So in summary then, the key elements for success in doing this kind of work is, number one, we need to establish a common language. This is not the roles of the road, this is the rules of the road. So how do we work together in organizations? So this is what I mean by an accountability and authority framework. It establishes the how we work together in this organization and gives us a common language to be able to discuss these kinds of things. Identifying the rub points is really important, and this is an 80-20 rule. And the good news for us, because organizations are so highly complex, is that 80, maybe even 90% of stuff in organizations works very, very well. And if there is a misunderstanding or a dispute, people are just able to work it out themselves. That's great. What we need to do, though, is work on that 20% of those issues where they do substantively take away from us being as effectively as we can as an organization. We need to create situations where we can talk about the elephant in the room, because often, unless we have a formal process like this, the culture of let's work it out ourselves just kind of sets in, and people don't want to be caught telling tales out of school. So we need to set a philosophy in the organization where if you can't agree with others, it's understood that the right thing to do is for each of us to escalate it to our respective managers to try to get the context clarified so that we can work together in the right way. The effective point of accountability, the EPA needs to know that there is a real job to be done here, needs to feel accountable for doing that work, and then needs to make the decision. So sometimes that gets a little difficult and uncomfortable in terms of bringing people in to hear their viewpoints on things, and rightfully so. People should feel passionate about their departments and their role and how they're going to work together. And then finally, once a decision is made by the EPA, that decision needs to be reset into a new context or an elaborated or improved context for everyone so that they know how to work together. I just wanted to point out this case. I didn't have a PDF of this, but it is available if you search for it on the web. It was published in Canadian Business, The Last Days of Target. And this was a perfect example of the elephant in the room, because Target is a US company that bought up a major chain, the assets actually of a major chain in Canada, and intended to enter the market in a large way and in a very quick way, and they failed miserably. They lost billions of dollars on it, and the people, these quite clever people that went back and looked at this, did see that the early warning signs were all there, but the elephant in the room was not discussed. The escalation to the executives in terms of these are problem issues just did not happen, and people did what people will tend to do. They felt accountable for doing things, and then did decide to move forward. So the last slide that I have, and then I've just a couple of, oh no, I got two more good ones. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left, so we're in good shape. So the accountability and authority framework then sets the foundation for how we manage here and how we collaborate together here, and it provides the rules of the road. In terms of cross-functional work, it's absolutely essential to develop accountability and authority with respect to how we work with each other. It's more complicated because in cross-functional relationships, I'm not the boss of someone else, so I can't tell them what to do, but that doesn't mean that there can't be real authority. So we've developed a framework, as you see on this slide. I give credit to Elliot and Jerry in terms of the work that they've done here. And we've come up with 3 categories of work, which are informing, persuading, and instructing. So if we think of cross-functional work, it can fit into one of those 3 categories. And then within those 3 categories, each one has 2. So informing can be either advising or recommending. Persuading can be either coordinating or monitoring, and instructing can be either stopping or directing. So within those, you can have a framework so that if people have common understandings, they're able to work. Because where I find most of that 20% of the issues comes up is when, for example, someone in finance believes they are instructing someone on what they're doing, and someone on the other end of that instruction believes they are receiving advice, and that's when the sparks start to fly. So anyway, anyone that wants more information on this, I would be very happy to provide it. In terms of the organization, there are this is quite a generic way of how work should be delegated, and it's really important that there be, in terms of things like an accountability and authority framework, that not only do we have the framework, but we have that discipline, starting with the CEO, of doing the managerial work, so that the CEO and the vice presidents are working these things together and discussing and agreeing, and the CEO is making decisions and delegating it. Then VPs are feeling accountable to do the same thing at their level, and so on down. For those of you considering hiring external consulting, my advice is that you have the external consultant participate at the executive leadership team level, because that's where you can have the objective support, make sure that the right questions are asked, and provide some discipline to the process, but that at the next round you'd use that as the opportunity to train an internal team, because really this work does need to be integrated into the ongoing work of the team. So I would never recommend that that the consulting team should do all of the work. I did have one question coming up here about, do we use EPA for organization design questions? And yes, we do in both directions. So sometimes the lack of EPA and the lack of clarity of accountability and authority is a result of poor organization design, so that we do need to, it sometimes points out that we need to think about how we get the layering right and how we get the functions right. From the other perspective, if you're implementing something like what you see on the screen, being able to have the right organization design in place becomes really important. So this is the approach that we would use in terms of implementing a new organization design. So thank you very much. I'm sorry I have gone a couple of minutes over. I just want to point out that on the website there is a lot of resources that are available to you that I would encourage you to use. There's also a place there where you can sign up for my newsletter. Please do that if you're not already a member, and once a month you'll get an update from me, and also usually about once a month, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more, you'd also get notices of upcoming webinars. Also to point out that we do have a YouTube channel. You can search either on my name or on Effective Managers, or there are links from the webinar section on the website to get there. And we've got almost 40 different webinars there. This one will be joining it shortly, and once it's in place, I will send you that link. So thank you. I've really enjoyed sharing this with you. I'm sorry about this format of webinars where they're not very interactive. I love it when the technology gets to the point where it can be more like all of us in a room, but I do appreciate all of you being here as participants. There is a very short 3-question survey at the end, so when you log off, it will pop up. If you could take a few minutes to give me that, any feedback you have, or ask any questions you might have, I would be delighted if you would do that. Feel free to follow me on Twitter if you're a Twitter person. You do get the odd management tip from there, although I must say I'm not as disciplined about that as LinkedIn. So if we're not connected on LinkedIn, that would be great, because we can stay in touch more easily that way. So that does bring us to the end. I do thank you very much. I'm looking very much forward to being in touch of each of you at some point in the future. Have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Hi, I'm Dwight Mahalitz, President of Effective Managers. Thank you so much for downloading the webinar. I hope that you enjoyed it and will find it useful. Feel free to check out other parts of the website for interesting downloads. Most are free, some are at a nominal charge, but I'm sure you'll find lots of interesting tools there and things that can help you be more effective. And in fact, that's what my job is. My job is to help you, help your organization be higher performing. The bottom line is that I want to start where you are, understand your problem, and provide services that can help you solve that problem and implement a solution as quickly and as effectively and as efficiently as possible. Give me a call, drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you, talk about your situation, and see if there's anything that we can do together. Thank you.